Come in, ladies and gentlemen. It's another edition of Orange and Blue Today, presented by Sean Ponda, Cecil, Lammey, Andrew Mason. Training camp previews continue. Did I call you Mason?
I think so, but this is a little off between the Mason and I was taking a sip from my drink. I probably shouldn't show the cup here, and I'll keep it off camera because it's a cup I got at Arrowhead Stadium on New Year's Day.
Yeah, fans would not like that.
With
They're
Andy
still upset
Reid's,
over you about the Tampa Bay Lightning. So
yeah, Andy Reid's smiling face on the side of the cup. But
okay.
Oh, well, I digress. That's why I'm going to keep it off camera here because we're going to keep the focus where it belongs on the Broncos interior offensive line, where there's really a lot to disseminate here and break down.
Look at that transition, Andrew Mason, radio professional or podcast, whatever we are, video show professional. The interior offensive line, I feel damn good about. And we'll get to Quinn Meinerz in just a little bit. But when your first move is Ben Powers, I mean, my God, it just gives you chills. And you had talked about it before free agency. You're like, hey, Sean Payton really covets interior offensive line. And guess what? As soon as things open up, he's building the offensive line from the inside out.
Yeah, he covets offensive linemen and he develops them well. You look at the Saints' interior offensive linemen during his 16 years on the job. Nobody has more Pro Bowlers. Nobody has more guys racking up all-pro appearances than the Saints did on the interior offensive line in that span. That is just how they see the world. I mean, remember, this was the team a few years ago that dealt Jimmy Graham at the apex of his powers for a deal that got them back a center and Max Unger, right? So that's what Sean Payton did with the Saints. And so longtime Paytonologists were not surprised when they saw that the Broncos' first move in free agency was to target this area and bring in a guy in Ben Powers who really had his breakthrough season last year with Baltimore, emerging as one of the better pass protecting interior offensive linemen in the NFL. Pro Football Focus may not agree. We talked about the little controversial ranking they had of Powers during a show back in June. But I think when you turn on the tape and you watch him, and we watch him out there at practice, we see a guy who is a nice blend of nastiness and technically sound play.
Yeah, you have that sort of athleticism with the nastiness. Usually nasty guys play out of control because they're just so aggressive. With Powers, like you get sharpness and technique and you get aggression. So it's the best of both worlds. That's why I'm super excited about him and what he can do. And just by practicing and performing the way he does, and how a young sponge like Quinn Meinerz, I mean, from Wisconsin Whitewater, from snapping at trash cans in Canada on some island and the Senior Bowl and breaking his thumb, like, look at how you and I, as two people that were at that Senior Bowl, like, look at how we've seen Quinn Meinerz grow. And I think there's more growth there. Sky's the limit for this kid.
Well, it's funny because he's got the power and the nastiness, and now here we are in year 3. He's still refining his game. That's what's going to get him to the next level. You see the signs of it already. In a year when it seemed like the entire offensive line seemed to regress under Butch Berry, the one guy who I would argue among the intended 5 starters who didn't regress was Quinn Meinerz, number 77. I think that says a lot for him and his potential. I think you're hard-pressed also to find a returning Bronco who is going to benefit more from this coaching change than Quinn Meinerz. You're going to more of a power-based scheme. I'll be honest, Cease, when I saw Quinn Meinerz out there at OTAs and minicamp, there were a couple of days we were at field level watching practice. My view is that the belly has gotten a little bit bigger than it was last year to suit the more power-based scheme that you got. I think Quinn Meinerz is going to be more himself than he was last year. And I thought he took some strides last year. But I think getting him into a scheme that suits his skill set marvelously is going to really cause this young man's career to launch to where I expect we'll be talking at some point in the next 18 months or so about the Broncos re-signing him and keeping him around for another few years.
As an old man, I find myself quoting movies all the time, and I always I
You
compare things
quoted a
to
movie, by the way, in your last statement. I don't know if you realized it.
which movie?
You made a reference to Chasing Amy when
Oh,
you
yes.
said best of both worlds. I can't really
Right.
say any more than that.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's
We
a
can't say
family
much more.
show.
Yeah, but it's funny, like, because I'll watch those movies back and I'll be like, I say that all the time. Well,
Yeah.
I'm thinking with Quinn Meinerz, because I was going to ask you about the belly, but it reminds me of the Looney Tunes because I grew up watching Bugs Bunny waiting for the bus. Where Bugs, I think there's like a train crash and there's a bunch of hats that are floating down and they land on him and Elmer Fudd's heads, and the different hat makes you act differently.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, and I may be misremembering this again, old man. Last year, Quinn kind of covered the belly up a little bit. He kind of downplayed it when he talked to us, like the belly, and he'd be like, well, and focused on whatever. And then this year, man alive, that shirt's up, that belly's out, and it is large and in charge. So I think personality-wise, just getting back to being the belly, I think that's good for him. He's in a good headspace.
He's letting the belly breathe again out there. He did mention last year that going to a zone-based scheme meant he had to shed some weight, and I think it affects his center of gravity a little bit. But yeah, I felt like, again, low contact practice, we can't see but so much, but I felt like we were seeing the Quinn Miners out there in OTAs that we expected to see. Doesn't mean it was perfect. He's still pretty raw, and he makes up for his technical miscues by simply being more stout, more powerful at the point of attack. But I think he's coming along very well. And I think by the end of the season, we're going to be talking about Quinn Meinerz legitimately being one of the better guards in football. And this pairing here of Powers and Meinerz, I think at the end of the season, we're talking about this being at worst a top 10 guard pairing, maybe even a top 5 guard pairing when this season is done. And that would go hand in hand with what Sean Payton has usually had from his interior offensive linemen when it comes to draft capital, when it comes to cash spent. Saints always investing more in the guards in the center than any team in football during the Payton era. And you're going to see the rewards of that this year with these two guys that they've gotten, Ben Powers and Quinn Meinerz. I expect a lot, but I think it's fair to have high expectations of these two.
Yes. Two finely gifted athletes there at the guard position for the Denver Broncos. And my final point on Meinerz, and I'll move quickly to the center point, the center position. I was watching warm-ups, and I don't feel I'll get in trouble for saying this. Meinerz is super flexible.
Yes.
Like
his flexible legs.
Yeah. Like he was doing the kick.
He's got
the above his head.
He's got the Reggie Roby leg kick. Remember him, the punter back in the day, and he would get, maybe not quite like Roby, because Roby could get it practically straight up, but you watch him, and that's the flexibility that you expect from a guy who's about 190 at 6'3", not someone who's north of 300 pounds. It's impressive to watch him, and it's just a reminder that this dude is actually a really freakish athlete.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the reasons why the Broncos picked him. I mean, you mentioned what we saw at the Senior Bowl. I mean, he was just bullying people around that week. Mm-hmm. Broke his thumb, and he was bullying people around that week.
Yep.
So it's a total package. It's just a matter of you're taking this lump of clay and you're still kind of molding it into something that's going to be outstanding. But this is also why you've got to be patient with offensive linemen. I do think that a lot of that in this day and age, with the need for kind of instant gratification, that we've seen offensive line development hit a snag because you're not patient enough. I mean, look, we just did the previous show on Garrett Bowles a couple of days ago. Aren't you glad the Broncos were patient with Bowlesy because of what
Yeah.
they're getting out of him? There
Yep.
you go. Be patient with Quinn Meinerz, and that means you live with some mistakes. You live with some holds that you may not want. You live with some timing issues because the benefits are going to be greater, especially in the long term. And that's another reason why I think we're talking about Quinn Meinerz signing an extension at some point before the 2025 season.
Yeah, be patient, everybody. And from Wisconsin Whitewater to the Pro Bowl, I could see it happening sometime.
Yeah.
Maybe not this year, but sometime. And I know it's not a giant show, but Andrew Thomas looked
Yeah.
like a bust, and now is like the best tackle in football, arguably.
Mm-hmm.
So like, just be patient, everybody.
Yeah.
Lloyd Cushenberry, what kind of patience should we have with Lloyd, who we all like, incredibly bright, gifted. He's not mean. I don't care what his teammates tell me. He's not mean. Maybe you don't need to be mean because you have Powers and Miners on either side of you. But we're at a crossroads with Lloyd Cushenberry.
Yeah, it's the fourth year. It's the bleeper get off the pot moment. And we saw last year how some rough moments in that fourth year can really derail your career. We saw that with Dalton Reisner, right? Because as we record this show, he's still unsigned at the time. That's how it can go wrong. Now, one thing with Kush that is worth noting, there's always been a really strong connection between Sean Payton's staff and the staff at LSU. Goes back to, of course, being with the Saints, LSU being down the road in Baton Rouge, staff members, coaches that go back and forth. There's a lot of exchange of information. Someone like Joe Brady, for example, works on Sean Payton's staff, then goes to LSU as the OC, working with Joe Burrow on that fabulous 2019 team. So my point being is, you have people with the Broncos that have known about Kush for quite a while, probably going back to when he was literally starting off as a freshman at LSU. And I think they're going to give him a real legitimate shot to consolidate his hold on the center position. And you said something really interesting because you talked about Powers and Miners. Because when you look at Kush compared to the other offensive linemen, you see big dudes or you see somebody who's really tall and long and Mike McGlinchey. Kush doesn't fit the body type mold, bigger is better, that the others do. So you're counting on something different from him. His superpower has to be what's up here, being the smartest dude on the field, which he often is. But being able to take that and put it to his game, just be a little bit quicker. Look, he's not going to overpower anybody, but can he be quicker and more decisive off the snap at reading things and getting everybody set? If that's the case, then I think the Broncos are going to be pretty happy with Kush and they'll give him a chance to stick around. But I think clearly, even though you've got Kyle Fuller, a free agent, of course, came in formerly of Seattle, and he's been a center with Russell Wilson. And you have, young guys like Luke Wattenberg and Alex Forsyth in the mix. We'll talk Forsyth here specifically in a bit. Right. But Kush is going to get the first shot, and Kush is going to get a legitimate shot to cement his hold beyond this year on that position. I would say this. I think the Broncos coaches like Kush more than Broncos fans do at this point.
Yes. I'll trust the coaches on that.
Yeah.
And we'll see. He's got his best shot this year, much like Russell Wilson. Like, hey, you're going to get your best shot this year, so make it work, and good things could be ahead for Kush. Now, you bring up Wattenberg, you bring up Forsyth. I believe it was our friend Emery Hunt, who is fan-flipping-tastic when it comes to analysis. He had Forsyth as number one center. Now, you and I did not, and we've discussed it before, which is great. Everyone has different opinions. But when Emery Hunt has that opinion, it's like, oh, okay, interesting. The Broncos have Forsyth here. They have Wattenberg here. Some other reserve interior offensive linemen. What do you think happens here when keeping tackles, guards? We got into that when we did our tackle show a couple days ago.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned Quinn Bailey a couple of days ago because he can factor in as a reserve at guard spots and the tackle spots. It certainly doesn't help him that you're going with a new coaching staff, but his versatility, I think, gives him a chance to latch on to one of those reserve spots. I think you'd like to hang on to Kyle Fuller just because of his experience. And again, he can swing between center and guard. So there's some value there. I would not at all be surprised if Forsyth and Wattenberg are battling for a single spot on the 53. With whoever doesn't get there, the Broncos try to get him to the practice squad. The other thing that comes into play here is Wattenberg taken by the previous regime. Alex Forsyth is a Sean Payton pick. You'd have to give him especially because the one thing that we do see from the film of Forsyth compared to Wattenberg is Forsyth does have a bit more power with which he plays than Luke Wattenberg does. And it's one reason why I think he's a better fit for what the Broncos are ultimately going to want. And then whichever one of those dudes emerges and is behind Lloyd Cushenberry, then it becomes a matter of how are they developing in practice? Because the other thing for Kush that is beyond his control is, let's say it's Alex Forsyth on the back end of the roster. How well is he developing? If he's coming along, making strides, then you're comfortable moving on from Kush and making Forsyth your center in the 2024 season. That's something to keep an eye on. Look, we've seen it before from the Broncos because in 2015, they were more than willing to hand Matt Paradis the keys to work with Peyton Manning in a center QB relationship, even though Paradis had been on the practice squad the year before. So don't, keep your eye on that because it wouldn't at all be a surprise to anybody if this is the scenario we're talking about in a year where you and I will be discussing Alex Forsyth being a center stepping into that starting role.
Right. They have options. When's the last time? And it's not like their depth is tremendous. Okay. But like, I just feel good about the offensive line. Could totally be wrong. But like, even with injuries, we talked about it with tackle. I feel the same way about guard and center. I was like, okay, Powers and Miners, obviously incredibly important, but like, you've got some options, and it's been a while since seemed like we used to grasp at straws with the Broncos.
Yeah, and how many times are we talking about like a guard, like a competition at one of the guard spots, or a question? Okay, if this dude can develop, blah blah blah, and you're still looking for Miners to develop, but I feel like you've not only got the right players for the scheme, but you've got players who have some upside as well. I think you got at guard, you got two powerful players who are going to step in and look really good. I would expect pretty quickly. And again, to kind of go back to what we were saying about Kush, if you've got two guys playing with that much power flanking him, and look, I think Garrett Bowles kind of talked about how there's a little bit difference in power and nastiness in this offensive line compared with some past Bronco offensive lines. All due respect to the guys who are on them, but if you've got those guys, flanking Kush, I think it's going to make his job a lot easier, and he can focus on the more cerebral aspects because it's still his responsibility to get everybody set pre-snap. It's still his responsibility to watch out for who's coming, and especially with a veteran quarterback like Russell Wilson behind him. But if you've got a couple of guys flanking him who can help out and help pitch in and chip on some of those A-gap blitzes, then I think you're going to make things easier for Kush, and I think you're going to allow Kush to flourish and play to his strengths.
Good news for the Denver Broncos. We'll see how it works out.
Good news, everyone.
Again, more always
our 20 to 25-year-old references.
Exactly. If you love old pop culture, then this is the show for you.
Yes.
And if you love the Denver Broncos, that's the show for you. Orange and Blue today. We are presented by Sean Ponda. He is Andrew Mason. I am Cecil Lammey. Our training camp previews continue. So everyone out there, smash the freaking like button. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned. And would you please stay frosty?